Welcome back. What is up? It is your boy Malocret, joined here by Sloan.
Yeah,
We were having some not
sunny
so
day.
savory conversations earlier, but yeah, really nice day out.
Yeah, sunny day. Wonderful day to go outside. The new Shake Shack opened up in Boulder. It's pretty sick.
Not a sponsor.
Not sponsored. Question
Yeah,
mark?
yeah.
Maybe sponsor?
Except
That'd be sick,
except
actually.
unless.
But yeah, no.
Welcome back. Thank you guys for joining us. So today we've got world building.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about it in previous sessions,
We've
but we
touched on
thought
it
it
a
might be
bunch.
a good day to really hammer it down and really
Yes.
talk about the ins and outs of how we like to world build. Obviously, both you and I in this regard are actually pretty evenly experienced in
Yeah.
terms of how much we like to world build.
No D12s rolled here.
I rolled d12s during my world building.
Okay.
That's a lie. I don't do that.
But yeah, we also received this. We also received this topic as a submitted question. So thanks for submitting your question. I'm, yeah. It's honestly, I'm happy that y'all are engaging with us and submitting questions and stuff. It's always really refreshing to see that interaction and such. But yeah, we can probably hop into like world building. We've touched on it a bunch of times, and we can just get started in, just jump right into where do you start with
Yeah,
world building?
where do you get going when you're thinking
Yeah.
about building a world? Where do you like to start? So I'll probably kind of ask the question itself, but Solomon, when
Yeah.
you're putting together a campaign, um, where do you start with the world building? Because I know, and we talked to a couple of people about whether
Yeah.
you write
Shout out to
your
David.
world first. Shout out to David. Whether you build your world out first, whether you build out like your story beats first, whether you're in David's case, you were talking to him the other day, building out your characters first.
Yeah, build the characters, then make the world fit around a variety of puns you set up, and that's honestly, kind of like pretty similar to how I did it to the most extent. Where like when I wanted to run a game, I really had a certain storyline slash kind of like plot line in mind that had like certain motifs and like a general aesthetic that I felt really couldn't be accomplished with like standard like Forgotten Realms.
Right.
And I kind of started out and essentially I kind of had this idea for like this whole like campaign in mind, and then I very much developed and added on and kind of very much worked around from starting from that quest and filling in all the blanks that would make that quest logical,
Right.
like make the elements in the story fit with the world. So I guess started out building out the bullseye before making the like gun.
Yeah.
Which is like a way of putting it. Like I knew what I wanted to do, and then I just started growing kind of organically in the way that I really just added and started writing stuff that I felt was necessary for the game.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
For sure.
Yeah. How about you, Jose?
So I like because a lot of my campaign writing is really centered on plot and story and a lot of like arcs and story beats and things like that. The way that I like to start is to generally start building my world off of what I think I'm going to need for specific story beats.
Yeah.
So a lot of it, I sometimes do, sit down and come up with a map first. But while I'm, either building out the cities or the countries or even just like
You're making
different
those with the
continents.
quest in mind.
Exactly. So like if I know I'm gonna have, for example, if it's gonna be like your run of the mill like item hunt, right?
Yeah.
Acquire
The quest to get
MacGuffins.
Yeah, the quest to acquire the 5 rings of whatever,
Yeah.
or the 3 shards of whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. So then I might think about my setting like, okay, if there are these objectives that I'm hoping that my players eventually move towards, where do I want to put those? Where do I want to start them? What do I want the start of the campaign to really look like to really drive them forward?
Yeah.
So like one of the ideas that I had for a campaign that I'd like to run eventually was this idea of like at the Magic Academy.
Oh,
and
yeah,
how
I
it's
love-
like
yeah.
a bunch of
We
grad
talked about that
students
one
that
before,
basically
yeah.
go on a MacGuffin hunt as their like as their basically their capstone. Getting real here for
Senior project design.
Yeah, exactly.
Acquire the 6 rings to save the world.
Exactly. So yeah, the whole like idea is like to have a MacGuffin, right? So, or a set of MacGuffins that they're searching for, And so yeah, for me, right, like I want a city that's like entrained in that has
Academically
magic
equipped.
ingrained
Yeah.
in an academic sense. So like basically like the equivalent of a high fantasy college town.
Yes.
Um, and so then
Yeah.
from there, you know, I can make statements about like that country, right? Like, is that country cool with magic? Like, does the local government like is it okay with magic? And then you know I can start building it out and create contrast. So I
Yeah.
know like this is a pretty magically liberal, you know, like country, but up in the north, like those people are
Oh yeah.
like you need
Yeah.
like your magic license or whatever. So yeah, you
Yeah.
can really start to separate and develop what things you want in your world, but I definitely usually start with my stories.
Yeah.
And where my starting points for the stories is really important for me in world building. But then beyond that, it's kind of more responsive, just seeing like, you know, things I'm expecting to need or things that might surprise my players.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I start.
Yeah, no, that's pretty. Like, I feel like starting out, the key thing in mind when designing worlds is, you always got to be wary or kind of conscious about the fact that, sure, it's world building is fun and engaging activity, but lots of times you really just need to write just as much as the box that you're playing in.
Right.
Like, you don't have to flesh out the full globe. You just need to flesh out one continent, or even in my case, I kind of superficially fleshed out the whole world
Right.
and focused super hard on one city.
Right.
And and that's as much as you need. You really, you always have to keep in mind as a DM, honestly, that you control what the players see to the most degree.
Right.
Like you have tools at your hand to restrict and obscure, as well as just smoke and mirror essentially.
Yeah. So that's the alternate path that I usually take is sometimes, and again, this depends on whether I'm like world. There's like a bit of a distinction I think between world building, and like setting creation.
Yes. That is true.
Because
Yes.
sometimes I will start with my setting and then get into world building. So that might be a bit confusing. So I guess just to give like a bit of context, right? Like we can think of Forgotten Realms, right, as like a setting.
Traditional high fantasy, D&D in its most classical, I guess, form to an extent.
So sometimes I'll start my world building with my setting building, which just means like I'm more so just laying out the basics of how like I want the entire world, not just like the country
universe
or the plane. Yeah, exactly. Like setting up how everything works, because I think one of the most valuable things for me in campaigns is the flavor text of every small thing.
Yeah.
So like I really like when players, for example, actually use like when there's like a magic item that says like a scrap of something, right?
Yeah.
Like I know for like the slowing claw, like that magic spell, like you have to like grab molasses.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's really cool when like the characters actually do that. Kind of in that same vein, I like kind of developing, for me, really importantly, magic. Like what magic is in the world. Is magic, just like material based? Is it something that exists as like something almost like a substance that some people are able to control?
Like a scientific study. Like
exactly.
Can it be classically like studied and observed, or is it just it just happens?
Right. Or was there like some cataclysmic like astrological event that created magic, like almost like a creation story?
Yeah.
Or is it just entropy that can be like that's probably my favorite approach to it, is that like magic is entropy that can be like manipulated by certain people, and so it like there's just like natural entropy in the world, and some people in some places just have like a more direct line to control it. Not to get too much in
a bit more physics and thermal.
Actually, a little bit more engineering. But
that's what you get when you get an engineer to make a world. You're like, okay, so applying the first law of thermodynamics to the spell Fireball.
Well, hey, if I was gonna run a campaign where they're grad students, they're taking courses.
True.
Funny enough, I like to practice my accents in the shower, which must confuse the fuck out of my roommate.
Yeah, shout out to Philip.
Shout out to Philip.
Hugs and snugs. Yeah.
But I really I've like thought about like the because like in that campaign I wanted it to be like they're actual students, so I was gonna start them in a classroom. And like the class that they're taking is like advanced magic materials theory.
Okay.
Which is like really getting into like
the nitty-gritty
why do some things call for material components?
Why do you need somatic at some points? Why do sorcerers how can sorcerers subtlecast?
Right.
I can only imagine the professor being this like kind of reminds me of one of my like Calc 2 professors. He was like, all right guys, today we're gonna go over the material components, and
But see that also gets into world building, right?
Exactly, yeah,
I created kind of like my magic concept, but then around like the specific plot that I'm building, like, okay, what characters do I need to carry this information? How much information do I want to reveal?
No, exactly, yeah.
And when I'm building the school, right, like how much does everyone know here? Are all the professors like experts, or like
are they hyper specialized?
Exactly. Like, do some people really just like know basic magic, and then they just have like their one niche?
I can also I can imagine having professors who are purely skilled in theoretical magic and don't even use magic.
Yeah,
they're just really good at knowing
magic history.
Exactly, yeah, because like you can be proficient in Arcana without being a caster.
And I think that's why when we were talking to David, it was interesting because I realized, like, after I thought about it a little bit more and thinking about it now, definitely building characters is also a really good basis for world building, because I know very specifically like the kind of like advising professor I want from the party. And so like I've already I've slowly developed this character in my head. I haven't like written it down, but like I already know some of his quirks. I know a little bit of his background, but his background is relevant, and so that leads straight into my world building. That leads into like, okay, this professor had connections here, here, and here. What happened? And then that gets into history, and that gets into like how it affected the world now. So really, world building can be as like specific or as broad as you want it to be. I guess that's like an important point to mention, because like I said, if you really want to get into a character study, you can basically do probably all of your world building off of like one character or one NPC and just build.
I fully agree. Yeah, no, like that's the case that happened to me with like one of my like an NPC idea I had. That was like he was like he was kind of involved in the plot to. The plot I had in mind. Actually, he wasn't really involved in the plot at all when I first wrote him out. I just wrote out, okay, he'd be this cool guy who, has this stuff. I can't say all the stuff since, some of my players might be watching, and some of the stuff is slightly spoilerish. But, like, he essentially was like, a crime boss and stuff, but he had like backstory and all that stuff. And the thing is, like I was like, okay, where does he work? Where is this place? And then I started fleshing out and connecting dots that I didn't even see at points. And that's always a really nice exercise. Is like you make the character build their home. And building that home. Sure, the players might not go there, but if they do, it does give it that sense. Of, I guess that taps into like a future question we're gonna cover, but like having it feel lived in.
Right.
Yeah. But I would say also, you mentioned creation myth. That is a big way of like a very common approach that I feel like is fairly respectable and like makes sense from like a logical kind of ground up kind of like, like very much pyramid based kind of like building thing.
Yeah. Setting up your pantheon, because that like bleeds over, right? Like once you create like the or I guess like the entities that kind of oversee everything, that's like kind of almost vessels that you use to build the rest of it out.
Yeah, like that. You can always just follow the traditional kind of like I guess creation myths, pantheons, then like large scale wars that happened, large scale conflicts, and then slowly build up until you get to what that person ate for breakfast.
Right.
It's a very gradual thing. Then it is an approach for some people, and it's very methodical, and some people enjoy that. Yeah. I'm not a fan of it because I don't like writing that much. But like it is a very much a respectable approach, I feel.
Right. And it really depends. Like some characters, because I know like for me it varies, but for most of the time I like having an idea of what an NPC is doing when they're not talking to the players, because like some NPCs are unimportant enough that like it's the equivalent of they walk in and as soon as my players walk out they despawn.
Yes, unnecessary NPC. You're like, hey guys, boop.
Yeah, okay, literally. But if it's someone important, like again, like this professor, for example, when they go off on their quest and they leave his office, he's doing shit in the back. Like he is committed to their success.
You do the Skyrim thing where they have their own life and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Like they go off, they do their own thing. And that leads to world building. Maybe they're getting a contact for a city you're arriving in. That is immediate. Like that is some degree of world building.
Maybe they get killed because of drama.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah,
spoiler maybe. Did I call one of you? Yeah.
Not quite.
Okay.
I haven't thought that far yet. Honestly.
That'd be cool though. Like, yeah. But regardless of what,
yeah. But maybe again they have a friend in a city. Oh, now we have to build a city around like that part. Like they're.
How are their friends? Are they like close friends? Are they pen pals?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I'd say world build. There's like a lot of points to start, and honestly, there's not really a wrong way as long as you're giving yourself as a DM the information that you need.
True. Yeah, exactly. That's the essence of it.
Because if you like, you can go into like a super deep creation myth and talk about every single god and every single demigod, go like super deep into that. But it's really easy to get lost in what is world building and what is just like writing, which there's nothing wrong with it. But in terms of what's actually going to drive your campaign, like this thrice removed demigod, is it actually going to come up? Maybe not, maybe, but maybe
perhaps.
not.
If the players are lucky or unlucky.
Yeah, exactly.
Either or.
So yeah, I think the starting point is just basically what do you what you as a DM think is actually going to help you succeed in running the campaign, because I overwrite for sure, but that's because I like having the safety net of if I need to pull lore out of my ass, I have so much lore that I already bothered to like be internally consistent. So I know if I pull out a character or a war or something like that,
exactly,
I can reference stuff and I can't be wrong, so to speak. Like I'm not gonna make a mistake because I already wrote the stuff.
Yes, and sometimes I feel I just got this idea, or kind of like this thought in my own head about sometimes running run the game. That's the best way of starting like building a story. Because in my case, a large amount of the like backstory and like initial writing I did because I was running a game and I wanted people to feel that their world was lived in and stuff. So I started writing, and like now we're like 2 semesters into like I technically 3 semesters if you count summer as a semester. Right. And there is that amount of I don't even write anymore because the world is so like full of stuff that pretty much runs itself now.
Right.
And and that's a big thing for like getting like where to get started. Start a game. Then you have a fire behind you to like actually write consistently and effectively. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, your starting point, I think that's a great point. Your starting point should be what actually brings you to deliver the rest of the world to your players. Because if you start with something really boring, really unentertaining to you, not only is it really likely that you won't be inspired to continue building out your world.
I hear that bass that's coming out.
People are throwing down.
They do be bumping on a Friday night.
I don't think it's coming through in the mic.
It's not coming through, no, which is
someone
nice.
Going hard upstairs. But yeah, make sure it's interesting to you because what I was saying right when I started talking about if it's not interesting to you, you're gonna lose interest in building it out, and also if you're not interested, there's a good chance your players are also going to lose interest.
Yeah.
So yeah, world build for yourself first.
Exactly.
I think first and foremost
for your own benefit as a DM.
Yeah. Don't worry so much about world building for the sake of the story you're trying to like. It should almost be like supplements.
You're making tools for yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
That's in essence what you're doing is you're machining the tools that you will use in your game.
Right, and be adaptable too because
flexible.
Something that I really like doing is I like to ask I usually have one-on-one sessions with my players before
they can help you flesh out also.
Yeah. So like if I say, hey, do you want to be local? Do you want to be from the continent but a different nation? Do you want to be part of a different continent? And usually when they start selecting like I want to be super foreign, I want to be nowhere from here, I have to kind of think in the back of my head and
make up this foreign world.
I literally wrote this continent and it wasn't supposed to get touched for 6 campaigns, but I could kind of start now, and I have someone that's interested in helping me building that out. So like that's always, one catalyst for world building. Maybe after I work with this one player who's very like from a foreign land, we've helped develop this like foreign nation enough that I'm comfortable starting a campaign there later on. So that's another way to do it. So yes, get a starting point.
There's lots of points. There's so many entry points, literally. But yeah, absolutely. And I guess that we can move on to our second question. Like, why build your own world? Why bother? Yeah, why bother when you have so much? Like world at your fingertips. There's Eberron, there's Wildmount, there's Forgotten Realms. There's technically all the Forgotten Realms like additions and stuff. There's so much content out there. Why make your own thing?
Absolutely good question, and you actually ran through such a solid amount. There is a lot of official content. Like if
source books fully fleshed out.
If you never wanted to write your own campaign, there are not just like source books and like rule books and resources, but also manual pre-written modules.
Yes.
Like
adventure packs.
You could literally spend all of your D&D days.
You can just do Avernus
in Forgotten Realms if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
Why I build world build, and again, a lot of people have different reasons, and we'll cover some of the other things that I think we've heard from people.
Yes.
My biggest one is that I like writing, and that and world building gives me the most open source for me to be like expressive in my writing, because like I'm not trying to like write a book and get published. I'm not trying to like write a module
Yeah.
and like have a bunch
We're
of people
engineers
play
here,
it.
you know. Yeah, with all you think we're gonna write is like maybe one research paper.
But I like writing. I really like writing, like creative writing. And so for me, it gives me like all of the flexibility to do whatever I want with my writing. I can, and I definitely write in a way that's very like module-y. So like
Fair.
I'll have introductions,
Self-contained
yeah,
arcs and stuff.
exactly. Like
That's
when I
fair.
write, I have like how the story beat might go. I like I said, I definitely overwrite for my campaigns. But that's because I really like doing it. The other big reason why I world build is lack of knowledge of Forgotten Realms. And,
That's totally fine, you know. Like, hey,
there's a lot of people that
yeah.
I know that really like Forgotten Realms lore.
Yeah.
And it's really cool and it's really awesome.
steal from it if you like. You know?
Yeah, I have not read, like, I know like the like 4 or 5 big gods in the pantheon of like the
Tier.
many like Tiamat and like the
Tiamat isn't
the
Tiamat.
traveler.
Tiamat
I thought it was like a forgotten or like a fallen.
Are they?
Fallen god or whatever?
They're like Bahamut.
Bahamut.
Yeah. The traveler
The Traveler.
technically, like Vecna,
Vecna.
right? We got 3. That's enough.
All right, we're killing it.
No need to. No need to further close into this thing.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, the moral of the story is I don't know Forgotten Realms at all. Like and this also comes from like my lack of I didn't really work with modules at all. Modules are probably where Forgotten Realms is primarily expressed
And shines the most in Wizard of the Coast primarily writes for Forgotten Realms.
right. And you know there's other like,
obviously
settings. You've got like Ravnica.
Yes. Oh yeah, true. Ravnica. I forgot
You've
about
got like
Ravenloft technically, and like all
Ravenloft.
the whole like Barovia
yeah.
in general. You know, like that's
So
a huge place.
There's tons of options. The reason
Yeah.
why I don't bother is because I'm too lazy to read them.
Yeah.
I'd rather like read, you know, whatever fantasy series I'm reading and then like just steal from that and like. So yeah, world building for me, as weird as it sounds, it's easier for me than bothering to like figure out what's consistent with Forgotten Realms or not. Because like one really simple thing, right? Like I like, and I think a lot of people like having regions where certain races come from.
Yeah.
Or certain groups or certain even classes come from.
Yeah.
And there's stuff there that like if you take a city like for example Waterdeep, which has been written and rewritten and incredibly well fleshed out.
There's a lot of
it
things.
would be really awkward to kind of take it and just be like, I'm gonna just cut a corner out of this and put a magic academy there and use everything else. Like, can you do that? Sure. Like, no one's stopping you. It's your world. You can do whatever you want. Or I could just build my city around a magic academy and not worry about what Waterdeep is already fleshed
just call it
out.
Air Shallow.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
I wasn't. Yeah, so when you're building out Air Shallow, you start with the airships.
Yes.
And
exactly.
and the magic and the magic school.
And you can do that stuff, you know, like airships aren't common in like Forgotten Realms, and like I guess it's like it feels pretty much similar to what I also felt when I made my thing. But I did want to touch on one thing. Some people homebrew worlds because they don't want to buy the books. You know, it's cheaper to homebrew a world than to buy like 5 books and choose. You know, have to choose and peruse through. Sure, there's ways if you know that are like dubious, yeah. But like generally speaking, you know, like it's just easier and a lot more, you know, effortless to just, you know, why read any of the other books if you know how to run the game and you have the like artistic or creative chops to, you know, make your own world. Do it. It's cheaper, it's more effective. You can tailor make it specifically to what you need.
Right.
Personally for me, the reason why I made a homebrew world is because, you know, I love all the worlds that, you know, like all the different like places that, you know, D&D, like, you know, Wizard of the Coast have offered us, you know, like there's lots of cool places, but none of them have like, you know, like the vibe I want, you know. There's nothing that's going to be the way kind of, you know, like kind of Dishonored, steampunk, kind of, you know, like slightly cyberpunkish, kind of very, very weird like genre mash of like what I want to run, you know. And generally speaking, you know, like sure, there's a variety. I took, you know, like a bunch of elements from Forgotten Realms in terms of, you know, like the weave and like how magic runs. I took a lot of stuff from Eberron in terms of, you know, like arcana mechanical constructs and Warforged in general, and like a bunch of the like kind of world building. You know, I took a bunch of inspiration from Eberron, but I also heavily played into, you know, like Ravnica's factions. because I really like the
Sure.
concept of having factions be ruling parties, and have that big of a thing. And technically, Ebron does have that in the way of their houses, but like factions sound cooler,
Fair.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
I definitely like the versatility and what
you have so
said,
much tools. It's
what you said was like really cool to me. It's just like the vibe, right? Like there's a certain vibe that you want certain settings to feel,
yeah.
and it's not that you can't take something that already exists in
You can totally take.
Forgotten
No
Realms
one's gonna arrest you.
and rework it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, some of those just don't have that vibe, and
Yeah.
like I
Make
think
your own
that
vibe,
the
you
big
know?
yeah, exactly, the biggest like I guess like issue and the reason why I prefer world building over just taking and reworking is because if I know exactly what vibe I'm going for, I can build every single like I don't need to borrow
Fair.
from things because I know what elements I want and I can just put those in and fill
That's fair.
as needed.
Yeah.
Because
Flexing, but
again,
yeah.
well, in terms of resources, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna have my shopkeepers with inventory, right? Like, I'm not gonna have like a backstory written for every single thing.
Yes.
Like what a lot of Forgotten Realms does with their more fleshed out modules and cities and things like that. Like, some of those people will really have like their entire life story written out, and they're like, oh, they have this passive ability because why? Because they killed a dragon when they were 11 or some shit. Like, they're like a lot of them are really fleshed out.
Yeah.
I don't need that much information, and I can also like if I really need that, I can just tack it on.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. Yeah.
But when I'm building, like for example, a city, usually I center it around either a place, a faction, like what you were mentioning, or the government and how it's ruling the people.
And sometimes the government can function as the faction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Often.
Oftentimes that's the case because it's the most fun, you know.
I like the thought of just crime being like all of the. Usually when I build a story that has high crime, as I like to call it, is because the government's like, we kind of need this illegal shit to happen to like maintain the peace.
Yeah.
You know, like it's a whole, it's supposed to be like about, anyway, that's getting into like how I write
the
my
nitty-gritty, yeah.
because I don't like my criminals just being like your run of the mill, like we do illegal shit because it's illegal.
Yeah, no, like that's totally fine. That's totally fair, and there's that kind of point of I very much do respect your approach of taking that whole creative thing, but personally for me, and I feel like it's very important to just like, I guess we covered it a decent amount, but you can just like, you don't have to take everything verbatim, like you can renaming stuff is always a fun thing to do, and like generally speaking, like it's I remember actually you probably enjoyed like one of the Ravnica factions is pretty much heavily focused on crime.
Yeah.
And stuff, and that's the thing is, like reading those books and those source books does give you a decent amount of inspiration on how other people run their stuff, and sometimes that's really good as an initial like beginner DM to see how, like, it's easier to see if you see a finished chair, it's a lot easier to make your own chair,
Right.
Like if you have the IKEA instructions on hand, you can it's easier to machine your own thing. But I guess that's pushing, engineering, obviously. But
Yeah, and then I think another reason why I really like just homebrew world building is because Forgotten Realms has sort of developed its history, right? Like like things that are known in Forgotten Realms that like. True. Like people know, oh, this cataclysmic event happened. This is
Black
where
Razor,
X thing
like
came from.
Yeah, like where all the books, like the Dragonlance books, also, and that whole setting. Like there's books.
So
and
if I want to write my own old history, homebrew is like homebrew world building is the best way to do that, right? Like if I wanted some cataclysmic battle that led into an era of peace, that led into like the Bronze Age, into like some other big wartime, like all of these things,
the
you
spell
can
plague,
really embellish your history.
Yeah, no, exactly.
To the point where, and this is why I value it a lot, it's not just because I like overwriting, it's because when I do one-shots, I like doing one-shots in my world in the past.
Oh, that's nice.
So there will be some artifact, like for example, I've done this twice in ways that I really enjoyed it. And both times it had to do with some artifact that existed in the present day of my campaign.
Yeah.
And when I ran the one shot for people, it was how that artifact came to be in the mortal world.
Oh, that's nice.
And so we took it back to like 200 years prior when the god had first gotten through a fracture. Yeah, literally. So yeah, that's something that I really like doing with history because
it's a fun thing.
One shots were kind of prevalent when we first started the club too. Like a lot of one shots were happening. And so I took that as my perfect opportunity to help me world build by having like putting names to faces. And I utilize these one shots and these characters and how the people that played the characters played them to put them into my world. So now I can reference, like I can reference this blade singer that did so and so thing to get so like X artifact out of the crypt, and that's why it came to be, right? Like that's why I really like working with the history of my world. And again, you can't just like, I mean, again, I'm not saying you can't. You can't just rewrite Forgotten Realms lore. No one's the Wizards of the Coast police isn't gonna show up.
Yeah, you're not gonna get arrested for. Yeah, yeah,
but,
no, exactly.
But it's you can be way more open. And
yes,
so
that's a good thing. Not restricting yourself.
Yeah.
That's a big thing also.
And I think it extends to, like, you can use Forgotten Realms and like use names and things like that, and just like do whatever you want with. Like,
for sure.
If you want Ravenloft to be where like Kenkus are from, and that's your that's your Ravenloft.
That'd be cool. That would be kind of cool.
It, like that's something that you're totally
dude. Where ravens
to do.
are actually a thing. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, no,
it's terrifying.
I'll talk about. Oh yeah, no, it's
so scary.
No, because like the Kanza Keep thing, they have a whole thing about were ravens. Not telling the exact book, but it might be about crows. But no, the thing is, there's a cool, and yeah, I do agree. Restricting yourself is another thing that you may fall on sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, always remember, no one's gonna tell you that you ran this thing wrong because it's your world.
Mm-hmm.
You have the right to do whatever you really want, as long as everyone's having fun.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
That's the biggest thing. You can write whatever type of world you want. You can do like a real world mashup with fantasy.
Yeah.
Like you can do anything if you really like. Yeah, literally, the sky is the limit here because you make the sky in this world. And you can make the sky purple if you want.
And just you can have as many moons as you want.
Yes.
And
6 maybe.
6, 5.
Tides be fucked up.
Oof, your oceans must be insane.
Yeah.
What I was gonna mention too, and this kind of came to me when we were talking about characters.
Yeah.
You can also kind of what's cool about like why world build. You can world build around your villains too.
Yes.
And this is something that I haven't done a lot, but I think is a really cool concept. Is that you can take your villain exactly like as you've designed it. And again, if you're taking villains from Forgotten Realms, this is less applicable. But if you're like built your own villain from scratch, you're taking like this demigod or whatever power level you're working with, you can really build the setting of where they're going to be encountered or how they're going to be encountered around that villain. And
just writing the origin story.
Right.
I did that for one of my like villains that the party has yet to encounter.
So like if you're trying to fit it in Forgotten Realms, it's almost like you're trying to like put it like a circular piece that is your villain into like a square.
Yeah, no, that is true. That is a very true
like
thing.
It's gonna like if it's the right size, it's gonna fit, but like you're gonna have gaps.
Well, yeah, no, that's the point where you saw out the extra like quarters and you just got a circle. Exactly. Easy. Engineering.
But yeah, when you're filling out things, I feel like when it comes to like restricting yourself, I think world building removes a lot of restrictions of trying to fit in the setting.
I agree.
And trying to fit within the rules, because there's also like one of the biggest variants that I've seen with people and world building is elves, and how like in Forgotten Realms they seem to be like the classical like Eladrin white hair, like very fine featured
Lord of the Rings kind of
exactly.
like high elves.
Yeah,
like the high elves in any game really, like Skyrim also.
Exactly. Whereas like for me personally, and for a lot of people, like a lot
more
of
like
people
Fae
like to do elves that are Fae. They look a little bit like very very thin jaw lines, very like you can kind of change that, but then you can also change their origin story. Like you don't have to make elves like, you can make them like the punished race of your world. You can make them the people that were undermined, that were like if you're getting into like
Dragon Age did that actually. Like and the thing, and like I was actually going to touch on this part. Sometimes homebrewing your world is just the best way of eliminating what elements that you might find problematic in different games. Like just having that freedom and that kind of like free blank slate to draw on is super useful to like any person as a DM. If you want to make a world you're more comfortable running. I remember we were talking about this yesterday about how in Eberron the goblinoids in general were the like OG race on the world, and they were like they were the master craftsmen. Right. Dwarves came after goblins, and they used goblin technology and stuff. Like the Draconi Empire, all that stuff. Like it's lore that you can, like, that's a key example of flipping the script.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
and that's a thing that lots of people enjoy and find refreshing, and I feel like that's one of the a fairly compelling reason to make your own world, is that you can portray races and do anything however you really want to do, and not feel like you're like betraying its OG source, because you are the source.
One thing that I really like doing, and again, this is rewritten by, just orcs in general. Whenever we cover orcs, I feel like they're that one D&D race that has been either the most stereotyped or just like gets the most like low level or like low appreciation,
Like bottom rung
presence,
sadly
in the world. What I really like to do, and I don't know
orc
where
samurais,
I
I
got this
love
idea,
those.
all of the orcs in my world, or rather, almost all of the master brewers are orcs, and that's because when I like
They have like a high tolerance.
I like to write tribe style history, like tribal style history, where there were a lot of different tribes.
Yeah.
And so a lot of
tribes
times
of
when
men
I
and, like,
write
all
up
this,
orcs,
Yeah.
I write the orcs as, well, orcs were the ones that worked in the fields where they could actually find like barley and things like that, and because they were the ones that traveled long distance, they were the ones that developed brewing first. So a lot of times I have orcs be the first ones that develop alcohol, and so when in a lot of my worlds, a lot of the master brewers are these big orcish dudes that are in very nice like pinstripe suits because they're businessmen.
Yeah. Oh, I love that fit. I love that fit.
Yeah, they don't fuck around. They're there to make like the best of the best. Like they're experts. And see that's like I guess one way that I like to flip the script often with my race. I don't just pigeonhole orcs there.
Oh yeah,
but
and
that is
different
one
makes
way
the point.
that I love to rework orgs. Yeah, exactly. The barbarian race. That's like what oftentimes becomes like what orcs get pigeonholed.
And when you make your own world, you're at liberty to like change that stuff. I feel guilty for calling on Ebron always, but they do, like Keith Baker really did do a really cool thing where he made orcs the shamanistic race.
Right.
Like the orcs were the caretakers of the world, and the orcs were there was a dedicated kind of like system where they were the like gatekeepers to all the like otherworldly realms, and they were like these super trained and like super skilled and dedicated. Because the thing is you can totally like, sure, they might be like physically formable, and they have you can still maintain the same like ASI stats, but it's just about upbringing and such, where perhaps they're a lot more wise and they're a lot more stronger willed,
Right.
because I feel like that's a very nice application to it, and I'm a very big fan of personally for me, I'm a really big fan for some reason of having like just orc samurais.
Yeah.
Just for the fit looks cool, like it makes sense, or just having orcs just be like, I also just generally try to approach when making NPCs to have the race thing be an after effect of them, like I seldom to actually really do, like I remember a couple of times they were just for like a joke where like I had one like a half dwarf half Goliath, and he's just embarrassed if anyone asks him which half is which, because it's and he's like this nice dude, it's like Trowbound Skull Smasher,
and that's actually one thing that I feel like world building is really valuable for, because
I agree,
this might get into the race conversation a little bit, but mixed races are something that I feel like no one does other than like the standards. Like you have half orc, you have half elf.
Oh yeah, like the mixes and stuff.
Yeah. Like
you can always break those molds,
Yeah. Where do you go beyond that? And so I like also in world building implementing things like, okay, why does this city have so many like half like why are the people here so short? For example, like everyone's stature is slightly smaller. And I could say it's because the halfling tribes and the human tribes, this is where they first interacted.
Yes.
And this is what became the nation of so and so.
Yeah.
Like you can, again, you have all of the liberty in the world, literally your world.
Yeah, it's your
to make whatever changes you want. So that's I think why I value homebrewing a lot, is because you can do whatever you want, and it's not that you can't do whatever you want with standard races, with standard like Wizards of the Coast content and Forgotten Realms and Eberron content. It's just that a lot of that stuff has already kind of built itself
been
around
cemented into like
all of the old things that have. I mean, D&D's been around since like
a while ago,
a
fat minute.
It's been a minute.
Yeah.
So a lot of those things have already either been like standardized or implemented, or just they feel like they have their spot in Forgotten Realms. And for me, again, there's nothing wrong with it, but for me, it feels weird to take like a Forgotten Realms thing and just like jam my own things into it.
That's fair. That's totally fair. Yeah.
Because I kind of did that with Dragon Heist.
Yeah.
When
Oh,
we
Watches
ran
of
those
Glory,
like with those water deep dragon heist
It may be a bit
campaigns.
restrictive, you know.
Yeah.
Like, I just feel like you're kind of fitting stuff like the circle into the box,
Yeah.
you know.
Like I remember, I think my favorite NPC from when I ran Dragon Heist was something that was not there. It was just like, I need a crime boss, but I don't like any of the factions that are here.
Fair.
I need this crime boss to sound like this, do this, and be from here.
Cockney accents.
No,
Bruiser.
he was kind of a gangster.
Oh, nice.
And he was really cool. I really liked
Yeah.
that NPC a lot. And so that's like the thing where like he really, I just kind of like stuck him in there. And he worked for what I needed, but I felt like I could have done so much more if I had him first, like I had
An
the character
established
first,
world that he
and then I
belongs in.
built it around him. Like he's
Yes.
the criminal overlord. He sees and does everything in the city. All right, what in the city is he touching? All right, this is the gambling sector.
Yeah.
This is where
The docks,
this is
you know?
where his one lieutenant runs shit. Like you can see how
The
it like
fighting
starts to
pits, you know?
expand. Yeah, do humans always mix with other races? Why? Good
Yeah.
question. Why do humans mix with other races?
Exactly. You don't have to,
I don't know.
you know.
Yeah. That's a generally. I'd say why is because humanoid is like the most
Compatible.
compatible.
Yeah, like it's the in between, you know. It's not
in
too
terms
short,
of
not too
official
tall.
races.
You know, yeah.
Yeah. They're the nice middlemen. They give people more mortality. I guess if you're an elf, you're
I
probably
guess,
gonna, a
yeah,
half elf lives
yeah.
not as long.
Like sure, there's like the whole like utilitarian kind of jack of all trades human archetype, you know.
Yeah.
And that is I do enjoy using it to an amount of just humans just being generally good at everything.
Yeah.
So you know, and they're in the middle of the height thing. They're not as tall as a Goliath. They're not as short as a dwarf. And they just kind of fit in that kind of like middle space. But I fully agree. Yeah, no, like have your like hobgoblin orc races,
Right.
have your like elf orc races, or like elf dwarf. That'd be actually kind of sick.
And
actually,
there might be again a world building reason why that happens. Is there a
Yes.
city where there was like a big like convergence, or was there a war that resulted in
exactly.
like a big convergence of those races?
You can have like, for instance, like like an elf and dwarf. They're both kind of master craftsman races.
Right.
So like the ultimate craftsman would be someone with the elegance of a dwarf and the strength of a dwarf, or the opposite. So,
Yeah, no, I got you. I got what you meant. Those are all totally valid reasons. So yeah, interesting. Why do world build, right?
Yeah.
So now that we've talked a little bit about like how we like to world build, where we like to start, once you have your world, this is something that it seems like, and this is one of the suggested questions that we got.
Yes.
I think.
And Clifford was the one asking. Shout out to Clifford in the chat.
Shout out to Clifford.
Yeah.
But it's a really good question, and it's something that I think really is really important as a DM.
Yes.
And it's how do you make your world feel lived in? So once you've developed your world, once you've created these characters, once you've world built to your heart's content as far as you need, how do you make it feel like
a
you
real
didn't
world?
just stick characters where they need to go?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what about what do you do? What are the extra little embellishments that you work into your campaigns and your plots and your world to make it feel real, to make it feel like your characters are exploring something that isn't just made for them?
Yeah, I kind of see it as, like how do you turn like a diorama into an actual movie, You have those initial like set pieces and stuff in there, but making that world feel like it's logically speaking this can happen, That's a really that's how I personally see it is, just does this make sense,
Right.
Like sure we're you can just create light from nothing, yes, but also there is a certain amount of logic that the average person would follow through. And if you like ran this through like an average experienced person in that world, would they agree that this may kind of make sense? Like that's a really big way of like how I think about it is,
Okay.
Like, am I jumping through too much hoops here? Are there too many jumps with logic or too much like railroading? Also, that's a key thing. Like be wary of making it feel like you're on a like a railed ride.
Right.
It's always nice to make it feel like you can walk around.
Yeah, for sure. So my biggest hack for this is, it's kind of not necessarily sinister, but when I write my campaigns, I very much give my players the illusion of choice.
Yes.
So like there's a very clear storyline that I'm trying to follow, because when I write like my arcs very specifically. I write it
Narrative
in such a
heavy,
way that I'm
cinematic.
going to kind of like drive my players in a certain direction.
Yes.
Do they have to take it? No. But a lot of the times, and again, this is just because of the way I like to write. I like to entice players. They don't ever
Yeah.
have to take the bait. I just bait them a good amount, and usually they bite.
It works, you know. Yeah.
And again, I guess it's different from railroading, where like if my player makes a decision that like goes off the tracks from where I need them to go,
You improvise.
yeah, I just work around it. Like it's not necessarily that they're not going to get back,
Yeah.
that they're going so far off that it's going to ruin my plan. I just find a way to work around what my player has changed.
Converging paths. and
Exactly.
Such, you know.
Yeah, it's just like a detour, a
Yeah.
bit of a detour, and I encourage that. I think that adds a lot of value.
Yeah.
But when I world build, and this is how I try and make things feel lived in, is when I create a plot, the plot isn't around the players. It's
around the
around
world.
the world.
Yeah.
So when something is going to happen in the world, when there is a conflict and something is happening in the world, in my head, it's going to happen whether the players are involved in it or not.
True. That's a
And
good way of thinking about
how
it. Too.
they get involved changes what might happen.
Yeah.
So not to like get too spoiler, I don't know if anyone would ever run this game because I'm about to go bye-bye. But
Oh, yeah.
you know, like one of my big things is like there's a trading company, right? And I sort of did this in one of my old games, but there's like a trading company that has started moving weird materials. Their patterns are changing. The criminals that they work with are no longer in the know for some reason. Informants aren't getting all the information anymore. So something's going on. And the players, I'd like to introduce them in a peripheral way where they're trying to like find something that's like associated with. So like, hey, one of our informants disappeared. That informant for me just happens to be part of that whole arc. So then the players will like they'll kind of brush up against it.
Yeah.
And whether if they're interested enough, they'll go digging.
Yeah.
And then they can change the outcome of what's going to happen. So I
Yeah.
already have like a lot of things set up, like on a certain day at a certain time when something happens, everyone's going to know, like the party's going to know because it's going to be a world or nation changing event. Like
Yes.
something's going to occur.
The day the Fire
Yeah.
Nation attacked.
They might know that's
You
going to
know?
happen before
Yeah.
it happens.
Yeah.
And maybe their motivation is then to stop it. So the way that like I like world building is that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, the field raised cows.
Clifford. I like to kind of set it up, and if things are going to happen. Things are going to happen whether my players like it or not. And so, you know, when I build that, I build a lot of my NPCs around it too. Like some of the NPCs know, or some of the NPCs are for sure gonna die, or some of the NPCs are gonna have information that the players need to befriend the NPC to know. So that's kind of how I make the world lived in. Is I make it very clear that the world continues moving, whether the players are following.
The
it
Earth
or
keeps
not.
spinning around when you
Yeah.
turn off the game. You know,
Yeah, exactly. People don't just despawn in my world
unless they're that one person
unless
that
they're that
despawn.
one random shopkeeper who made you your plate armor or whatever.
Yeah, no, literally. And I feel like honestly, like I kind of think about it in a way of making your world feel lived in and such. Is the general kind of trick that lots of game devs use in the way of creating scenery that you can't access. Creating like those huge like Assassin's Creed maps in the days of old when Assassin's Creed was nice. You'd have those huge cities, those huge sprawling cities, and then you'd have the countryside in the distance.
Right.
When you're on those huge like high viewpoints, you can peek into the countryside. You can see those fields of yellow and green and all those trees and general activity out there.
Right.
However, you can't get there. But the thing is, you as a player don't realize that in the moment.
Right.
You just see this huge world, those mountains way in the distance, and you think to yourself, "Wow, this world! I'm in this world,"
Right.
And that kind of illusion is a thing that I try to apply in my games to an extent where like I try to apply it nowadays with the application of newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
And news getting to the party.
Yeah.
Like the party's doing their own
Town
stuff.
yellers. Town yellers.
No, well, for them
That's
it's a lot
what I
more
use.
fun because it's a pneumatic tube that kind of pops up out of the floor at random points. Because it's a smart house. Well, yeah, but like it's
that's what that's
yeah, but like it's and the thing is, the party is doing their own things. They're dealing with this like to them world changing terrorist like attack and like all those like this group that they're trying to beat and stuff. But then the world around them, like sometimes like one of their NPCs, which is also my my semi quest giver slash guider back into subjects that are, you know, I want to like talk about.
Right.
And you know, it's generally speaking, it's you know, they're like, hey, did you read the news? Did you see what happened and stuff? And then I like, you know, like one of the players, can I read the news? And then I was like, yeah. And I go over and I explain, you know, like this city in this nation has had a crisis in this amount. Political tensions rise as this nation refuses to lift their embargo on this place, you know.
Right.
There's threats of war and annexation of an island off of this coast due to disputes that have happened in that area.
And you know, this it's interesting because like in back to the
Yes.
old days of old, when we first tried to do the Valskor continent.
Yes.
That was kind of what was like most exciting to me for that whole concept, where
Moving parts that you have no control of.
yeah. So for those of you who, I don't know if anyone's in the chat that remembers this, but in one of the AL Adventures League seasons that we ran early on, we tried to
now
get
CU Boulder D&D.
yeah, technically now CU Boulder D&D.
Yeah.
We try to get all of the DMs squashed into one continent, and basically just gave them like reign over like a city or like a nation or something, and their campaign would primarily take place there,
Giving them their own zone.
exactly,
And in some cases, moving zones.
exactly. And we wanted people to do things, and we didn't want to limit, and again, it was very experimental. It didn't go as planned. There was a lot wrong with it. But I thought it was really cool because the idea,
speaking,
the idea conceptually was that when something happened in a campaign, it might be big enough that it caught
Shockwaves.
wind, in other places.
Ripples.
So I think that it's funny you bring it up because I really like doing that. And when I was writing, for my current world, my intent was very much to have two campaigns running simultaneously.
Oh, and have them
where
interact?
one campaign could
That
do
sounds
something that either fucked over or like made significant changes to the path of the other. Like maybe one good example would be like if one campaign killed a guy that was involved in a criminal organization and they're working for the government.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, it turns out the other campaign that was their informant and the other campaign just killed them.
Yeah.
How do they adapt? Like what changes? And again, like
everyone gangs it to the two campaigns fight each other.
The world keeps moving, right? Like the world keeps moving. This guy got killed. He got killed as a consequence of what is happening in the world.
Yes.
Another way that I like to do that's less like contentious in terms of campaign versus campaign is I like having strong NPCs with a lot of presence.
Memorable, yeah.
So like one really good example, and this happens in movies. Where I've noticed it in movies, oftentimes there's like this, either like an emperor figure or like a lieutenant figure. So like you're
Played
just
by
like
an A-list
vibing in a
actor,
city. Yes. So like your characters are vibing in a city. They're having a drink, and then a gang rolls up, like an entire like squad.
Oh yeah, the
with,
posse
like,
rolls up.
One guy that's like very like embroidered, robed, very like very professional looking, and they're getting rolled up by like ranks of guards, right? Yeah. And they roll up. Does the party need to do anything about it? No, but like now they know that there's someone
They're bigger
or
fish.
something. Yeah, a bigger fish. There's always bigger fish, and they might be curious. They might be like, "Oh, who is this guy? Oh, is he shady?" And then maybe like they ask the right NPC, and the NPC is like, "Well, yeah, he's like the emperor, but like so and so like we heard this and that." And then
rumor has it,
exactly.
You know, he has like he has two noses. Who knows what the second nose is?
And again,
for nostril,
intrigue,
you know, for nostril James, you know, he's out there.
I think the way that I make it lived in is I give them memorable things that they don't necessarily need to interact with. As long as they see it, they know it exists somewhere in the world.
I feel like a decent example is just the concept of, you know, your party isn't the only party in this world, you know?
Right.
There are bigger fish and there are smaller fish. I remember there's a fairly interesting, and I somehow just popped in my mind. You know, you remember Spore?
Yeah.
You remember how, you know, when you were that amoeba, there was those huge fishes that like swam above you or under you, and those shadows of, you know, these hulking, you know, like huge things. At the point, they were these like insurmountable, you know, like you would not be able to survive against them. But the more you grow, the more you realize you are growing in this world, and the world is, you know, changing with you in that amount. And just having that feel of being, you know, a medium-sized fish in a large pond,
right.
You know? And that's a really good way of kind of like envisioning it in terms of, you know, like basic design, is you want to have bigger players and smaller players feel present, and you don't have to have them affect the game too much, as much as just make their presence known. And like you said, memorable NPCs and such. I remember there's also a fairly decent way of doing it is having a persistent world in your games. You know, having one campaign setting, like one setting that you run all your games in, and having effects from each game, you know, carry over and such. You know, like shout out to Kobe, like his games run that way, and you know, like it's a persistent world where the players build history to an amount, and you know, like I've been trying that out in my game too with like this one shot I was running is this expedition into this new continent. However, in the current, like in the actual game, it's been like 2,000 years since that's happened, you know, and like it gives both, you know, you and your players a nice glimpse into the past, and makes your world feel like, damn, these people existed before us, and there will be people living after us. And that's a big thing to just like think about that.
Yeah, that's one easy thing to forget, and I like how you said that, like there's other parties, because this might be something for a different topic, but we've talked about how like some DMs, and again there isn't a right way, but some DMs build their world around their characters being the heroes.
You don't exist in a vacuum. That's the biggest.
Ones that, they're like the ones that exist in a vacuum, and they're like the things that are going to drive the world forward. That's totally cool if you want to run it like that. And there's ways
it has
to
a vibe to it that's
make
acceptable.
It alive. With that concept. But for me, it's a lot easier if my world exists and things change in the world as a consequence to the players.
Yes.
But the players, like, things are going to happen in other places, whether like, I've kind of said this, not to sound like a broken record, but I've said this a couple of times. Like, things are going to happen whether the players are involved or not.
That's a good way, like, the clock ticks always. Right. You know, that's how kind of you kind of think about it, is that time doesn't stop, you know. The game does not pause. This is a live game. This is a live service event, you know.
Mom can't ruin my immersion. I can't pause this.
My elo's gonna drop, you know, like that's the thing. Like, and that's a good way of thinking about it, is like while the players are resting and sleeping, halfway around the world it's morning, someone just died. You know, and that's like a very simple way to think about, you know. While your party is existing, some party somewhere in this world most likely just got eaten by a green dragon somewhere. You know, and you know, maybe, and you know, someone got orphaned, someone got widowed, and someone might have just found a really cool skeleton. You know,
there's a lot of things that can be happening.
Like just having that mind, like, you know, and you don't have, and it's up to you how much you want to give that vibe, you know, because some people do enjoy having that feel of they are the heroes, they are the Avengers, you know. There's no one else to save the world except them, and that's totally acceptable and totally fine. And in that case, you know, you have other tools, you know. You have like persistent history, you know, like I guess developing your history is a really good way. Just like having past events is, like, you know, generally speaking, a very surefire way of, you know, like having the world feel lived in. Small stuff also, you know, trinkets, landmarks, mentions of stuff that describing stuff that isn't essential to the game. You know,
embellishment is probably the best way that you can like describe it, because the thing that I like to like that I subscribe to actually I can cover
calendar
this right away. From a DM perspective, how do you keep track of said clock? My clock runs on events. So like the way that I run how my world, like the speed at which my world is running, is I set up an event, right? And maybe players are working through an arc. Either I will line it up with the arc, or I'll just have it happen when I think things need to start moving. Sometimes I use it to my advantage and to push a campaign forward. And that's like probably what helps me keep track of it most. But in terms of a clock, you always keep in mind that nothing is rigid. You can do whatever you want. So I like to run mine by events. And sometimes those events can link up to my players' arcs. So if for example, going back to to that shipping example, right? Shipping company doing a lot of shady shit. There's going to be...
They have their timetable, you know?
There's going to be a massive explosion or something. Lots of people are going to die, and people are going to find something really sinister in the ship that exploded.
The bite of 87.
The news is going to get around. The tea is going to spill into the water, literally.
Fuck. Spill the tea.
The tea will get spilled, right? And I can either line that up, whenever I want. Like I decide, okay, this is the day that it happens. My players are gonna hear about it now.
Incidentally, the party's by the docks having breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. Like they could literally be chilling, having
got the best seats.
Post arc beach episode right where the explosion.
Oh, you just
happens.
hear a huge atom bomb just detonate.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, rip.
Yeah. But yeah, I usually work it. That is where I guess there has to be like a bit of like commingling. So I'm saying that's gonna happen at some point. That's just something that I've set up to have happen. I can choose when that is relative to when I feel like it's most valuable to my campaigns. So if I decide that they got through the whole arc and then it wasn't relevant that whole arc, I'll let the arc come to a conclusion and then I'll have the world event happen.
Yeah.
And maybe at that point, either the players will be intrigued by the world event or they'll continue with their own path. And then the world event the next world event will be scheduled for, later on, and I'll just do the same thing.
Yes.
I'll push them through their next arc, whatever arc that ends up being. And if there's a point where I think that relevant world event can come up in their current arc, I'll just stick it in there. It happens now. Or I can wait. And it's really about like where you find it most useful. And you can also not do it. Like if you decide that that's not what you wanted to have happen and you want to change your world around what your players did instead. Yeah. Because again, no one can tell you no. You can do that.
You can do whatever you want.
Go for it.
Once again.
It's
you have the power.
I guess like the way that, and maybe this wasn't clear, the way that I think that helps the world feel lived in should be kind of driven by your NPCs. So your NPCs should sort of act, or at least this is how I do it. My NPCs act and do things around my players because they're in the know. They might know things about this world event. They might be associated with it. And so they're going to drop little hints, or they're going to drop seeds of information and seeds of intrigue to my players to where my players might bite. And again, they often do. That's just how I write my campaigns.
They signed up to play D&D.
Yeah, exactly.
They want action.
Yeah, so they can go, again, they have the world to explore. But often what they chase is like the little hints. And honestly, players do pay attention. And it depends on your party, but at least in my experience,
they are conscious of basic narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
you're not like reinventing the wheel in terms of storytelling. That's not.
They've
what
read a book before. They've seen a TV show.
Exactly.
And I feel like personally for me, what helps me personally is I have a log of every single day the party spends. And essentially, I literally track like what day of the week it is and how much weeks it's been since the campaign has started. And this depends on my end. It works just because the party is almost always doing something every single day, and those long rests, like all that's, it gives you, as a DM, a general kind of scope of, okay, so it's been like 50 days since this event. It's been 20 days since this event. 15 days since this event. Like it's been a while since they've met this person. What happened to them? And, like with that, along with just a small bit of effort of making a calendar that works, you can just, like, I've not done that, but like making a calendar that actually works and you can apply stuff to, you can just do something that, like could be an interesting exercise in setting up certain events on the calendar and just waiting until the party gets to that event for it to trigger, and having the events be completely independent from your story progression could be possibly useful in the way of it being that this is literally something unrelated to your party. It's the world living, and that could be very useful. And mind you, the other thing to keep in mind is have those events maybe be not as impactful to the story, because that might just throw you off of your own story beats if it's that relevant. Right. But have maybe the eclipse happen. Have like a full moon at this time. Have random things that may have small ripples. Small stones in the puzzle. Have that be there and run by that schedule. Yeah,
that's a good if you like really keeping track of your days, that's a great way to do it. Yeah. I definitely do it way more loosely in terms of timekeeping.
If your party's traveling a lot, then yeah.
In terms of timekeeping, I do it mostly by seasons.
Fair.
And that's because I can be pretty fluid with it because I'm not like, if at the beginning of the campaign I don't define how long a year is, like my year could be 40 days for all they fucking.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe
each
my
season
winters,
is like a week.
My winters are just like super long.
It's a year winter. It's the long winter.
Yeah. So
Winter's
the way I do
coming.
it is by seasons, and sometimes I line up certain world events to happen with certain story points where I'm gonna put
Yeah.
like a celebration.
Yes.
So like if they walk into a city, like one of the
It's
classics,
tier
I
day.
think,
It's,
yeah, one of the classics for storytelling, I think, is when a party shows up to a new city and there's like a festival going on.
Yeah, and you can put a festival music. People are dancing around. Someone dies,
Oh,
and
no.
just add that tension.
Oh no. Nightbot's being angry.
What?
I don't know. It timed Clifford out. Oh, because it was the exclamation marks.
Oh,
Our Nightbot.
Riv.
Apologies. Our Nightbot apparently got mad at you for your exclamation marks.
Nightbot do be acting up though. Not gonna lie.
Slightly fewer symbols. I don't know if we can
We can fix that.
It's
We'll
just,
fix
it's just
that
for
in the
5
future.
seconds.
Yeah.
But yeah, like walking into a town and having a celebration. Maybe that celebration for me, like when they move to a new city, I'm like, oh, it's the changing of winter. Guess what happens when winter comes? And then
You have the child
boom,
sacrifices.
The event happens.
You gotta
because
sacrifice,
all
yeah.
the right amount of kids got sacrificed, and we're good.
Shout out to American Gods.
Shout out to the canceled show that we've spent
Rifts and-
so long.
I'm pissed it's canceled. It's fun.
Yeah,
But
so
yeah,
we
I feel like
actually
that covers
just rolled
everything,
over
yeah.
5. So yeah, I think that was a good topic for discussion.
Yeah.
So thanks for everyone who joined us. Again,
Yeah.
make sure you guys are sending us topic suggestions and questions, so that we can
Feed us your
sit
questions.
here- we need, so we can sit here and argue about them. Join the Discord for CUD&D if you haven't already. That is where we put out the polls. I think we did another really bad job this week. I don't know when the polls went out, if they went out at all.
They went out. They went out the day before. We got a question. That's
We
what
got
matters, you know.
But yeah, and then make sure you're checking out our VODs. If you missed the episode, tell your friends
Yes.
to go watch on YouTube. Those will be up there. Usually
Forever.
we get them up pretty quick.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us, and yeah, thanks Clifford.
Enjoy
Yeah,
the-
definitely
enjoy
keep
the weather,
sending
yeah.
more. Yeah, enjoy the nice weather. It's nice
Yeah.
out. If you're in Boulder or if you're elsewhere, bummer. Get better weather, idiot. Yeah, we'll catch you guys on the next one.
See ya.